I'd like to introduce the real owner of this company. If that sentence hit you like a punch to the chest, imagine hearing it while standing in the back of a room filled with people celebrating your success. That's exactly where I was. Not on stage, not next to the screen with my company's logo glowing behind it, not where I was supposed to be. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. I was standing near the bar, half hidden behind a pillar, watching my husband, smile under the spotlight as if nothing about this moment was strange. And then he gestured toward her, a woman I had never seen before. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfect timing. She walked onto the stage like she belonged there, like she had always belonged there. The audience didn't hesitate. Applause erupted instantly, loud, confident, certain. No confusion, no questions, just acceptance. So let me ask you something. What would you do in that moment? Would you interrupt? Would you storm the stage? Would you scream? I didn't. I nodded. And then I laughed. Quietly, to myself. Because what no one in that room knew, what he didn't know, was that tomorrow had already been set in motion. Let's rewind. 6 hours earlier, I was standing in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting a navy silk dress I'd bought months ago for this exact night. My name is Elena Marquez. I'm 34 years old. And that night was supposed to be the biggest moment of my life. The official launch of Neurowell, my company. Not an idea, not a side project, not a maybe someday. A real company, built from nothing. Years of work compressed into one night. I had sacrificed everything for it. Sleep, stability, relationships, comfort. There were months where I barely recognized my own life anymore. But it worked. We had investors, we had press coverage, we had momentum, and I had Daniel, my husband. Daniel Brooks, 37, charismatic in a way that made people lean in when he spoke. He had this effortless confidence, the kind that made investors trust him within minutes. In the early days, that confidence saved us. When I doubted everything, he didn't. When I hesitated, he pushed forward. At least, that's what I told myself. Because somewhere along the way, things shifted. Not all at once. Nothing obvious. Just small changes. He started taking more meetings alone. Started saying things like, "You focus on the product. I'll handle the people." And it made sense, didn't it? I was the builder. He was the communicator. A perfect balance. Except, balance doesn't usually feel like disappearing. By the time I arrived at the venue that evening, the energy was electric. Soft gold lighting, glass walls overlooking the city, music low enough to feel expensive. Everything looked exactly how I had imagined, except for one thing: the screen. A massive LED display at the front of the room. Our logo was there, clean, minimal, perfect. But something was missing. I stepped closer, scanning it again. No tagline. Fine. No product visuals yet. Fine. But then it hit me. No name. Not mine. No, founded by Elena Marquez. Nothing. Just the company. Have you ever had that moment where something feels off, but you can't prove why? That was it. A quiet discomfort, easy to ignore. So I did. I found Daniel near the stage, laughing with 2 investors. He looked at me, smiled, kissed my cheek like everything was exactly as it should be. "Hey," I said casually, Why isn't my name on the screen? He didn't even blink. We simplified the visuals, he said. Cleaner branding. Simple, easy, logical, and just vague enough to end the conversation. Then he added something else. Hey, stay off stage at the start, okay? I want to build anticipation before bringing you up. That didn't feel right either. But again, it sounded right. Strategic, planned, smart. So I nodded, and now here I was, 6 hours later, standing in the back, watching him hand over my company to a stranger, watching the screen update in real time. Founder and CEO, Victoria Hale. My name? Gone. Completely erased. And still, I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't stop it. Because in that exact moment, everything finally made sense. Every late night, every missing detail, every just trust me. It all clicked. And the most surprising part? I wasn't shocked. I was prepared. Because this wasn't the moment everything fell apart. This was the moment everything I had already set into motion began. The moment I saw my name missing, I knew this wasn't a mistake. Let me ask you something. How many small things does it take before you realize something isn't small at all? Because for me, it wasn't just the screen. It was everything that led up to it. 6 months earlier, things started to feel off. Not dramatically, not in a way you could point to and say, that's the problem right there. It was quieter than that. Daniel started taking more calls outside. At first, I didn't question it. Startup life is chaotic. Conversations happen at weird hours. Privacy isn't unusual. But then it became a pattern. Phone face down. Laptop closed when I walked in. Conversations that stopped the second I entered the room. And every time I noticed, there was always a smooth explanation waiting for me. Investor confidentiality. Early-stage negotiations. You'll be looped in soon. Soon. That word started to stretch longer and longer. At the same time, something else shifted. People stopped coming to me. Not completely, but enough to notice. Emails that used to be addressed to both of us suddenly came directly to Daniel. Meetings I used to lead were now handled. Decisions I thought we'd make together were already made. And when I asked, it's just faster this way. Faster, efficient, reasonable. All the right words, arranged in a way that slowly pushed me out of my own company. Now here's where it gets important, because I need you to understand something clearly. I wasn't absent. I was working harder than ever. Product development, hiring, financial modeling, infrastructure, everything real, everything that made the company function, that was me. Daniel handled the outside world. And somehow, the outside world started believing the company was his. Then came the paperwork. One night, around 11 p.m., Daniel walked into my office holding a stack of documents. Hey, he said, casual, like it was nothing. We need to finalize some restructuring stuff before the next funding round. I remember being exhausted. We had a product deadline, a vendor issue, a hiring gap. My brain was already overloaded. What kind of restructuring? I asked. Nothing major, he said quickly. Just adjusting equity distribution for future investors. Standard stuff. Standard. Another one of those words. He pointed to where I needed to sign. Page after page. I skimmed. Not deeply. Not carefully enough. And yeah, you can already see where this is going, right? But here's the thing people don't tell you. Trust doesn't feel like a risk when you're in it. It feels like efficiency, like partnership, like love. So I signed. A few weeks later, I saw her, Victoria. At the time, she was just a passing moment. I had just stepped out of a meeting room when I noticed a woman walking beside Daniel down the hallway. Tall, composed, the kind of person who doesn't look around because she doesn't need to. They were mid-conversation, focused. I caught Daniel's eye. He paused, just slightly, then smiled. "Oh, Elena," he said, almost as an afterthought. "This is Victoria. She's consulting on some expansion strategy." Consulting. Victoria smiled, polite but distant. "Nice to meet you," she said. And then they kept walking. That was it. No explanation, no follow-up, just gone. Looking back now, that moment lasted maybe 10 seconds, but something about it stayed with me. Not loud, not urgent, just unresolved. And then there were the investors. Subtle changes again. At events, they started asking Daniel bigger questions, vision questions, future direction questions, the kind of questions they used to ask me. And when I answered, they'd nod, but then look back at him for confirmation. That's when it hit me. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. The narrative was shifting, and I wasn't controlling it anymore. So I did something I hadn't done before. I stopped trusting the surface. Quietly, without telling Daniel, I started checking things. Internal documents, updated filings, equity records. At first, everything looked normal, or at least normal enough to not raise alarms. But then I found something. A discrepancy. Small, technical, easy to overlook. But it didn't match what I remembered agreeing to. And that's when the feeling changed. From confusion to certainty. By the time I walked into that launch event, I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't hoping I was wrong. I knew. Not everything, not the full picture, but enough to understand one thing very clearly. Daniel thought he had already taken everything from me. And the most dangerous part? He believed I had no idea. Daniel believed he had already taken everything from me. And honestly, I can see why he thought that. Because on paper, it looked perfect, clean, final, irreversible. That's what made it so dangerous. Let's break it down. After I found that first discrepancy, I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I went deeper. Late nights, quiet searches, cross-checking every document I could access without raising suspicion. And what I found? It wasn't just one change. It was a pattern. Ownership percentages had shifted, not dramatically at first, just enough to look like standard dilution from investor rounds. But when I tracked the timeline carefully, it didn't line up. Some of those changes weren't tied to funding at all. They were tied to internal restructuring. The same restructuring Daniel had rushed me to sign. Remember those documents? The ones I signed at 11 p.m. without fully reviewing? Yeah. Those weren't standard. Buried inside them were clauses that allowed for conditional share transfers under specific strategic decisions. Vague language, flexible interpretations, the kind of wording that sounds harmless until someone decides to use it creatively. And Daniel did. Step by step, he had been shifting control, not directly into his own name, that would have been too obvious. Instead, into hers, Victoria Hale. At first, I didn't even believe it. I thought maybe I was misunderstanding the filings, but the more I looked, the clearer it became. Victoria wasn't a consultant. She was being positioned as a controlling stakeholder. Quietly. Legally, at least on the surface. And Daniel? He was orchestrating the entire transition. Now, here's the part that changes everything. Because this wasn't just about ownership. This was about narrative. While I was building the product, they were building the story. Investor meetings I wasn't invited to? That's where it happened. Private presentations, selective explanations. Framing Victoria as the visionary force. Framing me as something else. Important but replaceable. Technical but not essential. The kind of founder you phase out once the company grows up. And the worst part? It was working. By the time of the launch event, most of the key investors already believed it. That's why no one hesitated when Daniel made that announcement. That's why the applause came so quickly. To them, this wasn't a surprise. It was confirmation. So yeah, standing there in that room, watching Victoria smile under the spotlight, I wasn't just watching a betrayal. I was watching a plan reach its final step. Public validation. Make it official. Make it visible. Make it real. Because once the world believes something, it becomes a lot harder to undo. But here's what Daniel didn't understand. He wasn't the only one making quiet moves. Weeks before the launch, I had already started preparing. Carefully, strategically. I reached out to a corporate attorney. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a consultation. Hypothetically, I asked, what happens if ownership changes are made without full informed consent? That conversation turned into documents. Document review turned into deeper investigation. And that investigation? It uncovered something Daniel clearly didn't think I'd notice. There were inconsistencies. Not just questionable decisions. Actual legal vulnerabilities. Gaps. Mistakes. So while he was planning the launch, I was building a response. Piece by piece. Quietly. Back at the event, I stood there as Victoria began speaking. Confident, polished, controlled. She talked about the company's future like she owned it. Like she had always owned it. The audience leaned in. They believed her. Every word. And I'll admit, for a second, just a second, I wondered what it would feel like to walk up there and stop everything. To take the microphone. To expose it all in front of everyone. Right then. Right there. But I didn't. Because timing matters. And chaos isn't always power. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and checked my messages. There it was. A new notification. From my lawyer. Short, simple, precise. Everything is in place. I read it once, then again. And slowly, I smiled. Not because I had already won, but because I knew something they didn't. Tomorrow morning, none of this would hold. Not the applause, not the title, not the illusion they had just created. I looked back at the stage, at Daniel, at Victoria, at the screen with her name where mine used to be. And I thought, go ahead, enjoy this moment, because what they believed was ownership was about to be tested. At exactly 9 a.m. the next morning, everything changed. But to understand why that moment mattered, you have to look at what I did right after the applause ended. Because I didn't stay. No dramatic exit, no confrontation, no whispered arguments in a corner. I simply left. Quietly. While the room was still focused on Victoria's voice, her confidence, her version of my company. No one stopped me. No one even noticed, not even Daniel. Have you ever realized in real time that you've already stepped out of something before it officially ends? That's what it felt like. Not loss, not shock, just separation. Outside, the air was colder than I expected. Or maybe I just noticed it more. The city was still alive, cars moving, people talking, everything continuing like nothing had just happened. Like I hadn't just been erased in a room full of people who once knew exactly who I was. I got into my car, sat there for a moment, hands still, mind moving, replaying everything. Not emotionally, not anymore, just analytically. Every conversation, every document, every trust me. It all fit now, cleanly, too cleanly. And that's when something important clicked. Daniel hadn't just been confident. He had been confident, comfortable enough to do it publicly, comfortable enough to put it on a stage, comfortable enough to believe there would be no consequences, which meant one thing. He thought the structure was airtight. But it wasn't. Over the past few weeks, as I worked with my lawyer, we had gone through everything. Not just what was obvious, what was hidden. The ownership transfers? They weren't executed cleanly. They relied on clauses that required full board awareness and approval, not just signatures, not just implied consent, actual, documented authorization. And here's the part Daniel overlooked. I wasn't just a shareholder. I was still a board member, a required one, which meant those transfers, they were incomplete, legally vulnerable, and in some cases, potentially invalid. But we didn't act immediately. That was the key. Because timing isn't just important, it's everything. If I had challenged it early, quietly, behind closed doors, it would have turned into a negotiation, a discussion, a slow, controlled adjustment, something Daniel could manage. But if I waited, if I let him go all the way, make it public, make it official, make it visible, then the stakes changed. Because now, it wasn't just internal. It was external. Investors, media, reputation, everything tied to that moment on stage. So we prepared. Carefully. We documented every inconsistency, every missing approval, every misrepresented clause. And then, we filed. An emergency legal action, structured to activate the morning after the launch, not before, not during, after. Which brings us back to 9 a.m. I woke up early. Not because I had to, but because I already knew I wouldn't be sleeping much. My phone was on the nightstand, face down, silent. I turned it over, and for a second, I just looked at it. Then I unlocked it. Notifications flooded the screen. Missed calls, emails, messages stacked on top of each other. Names I recognized instantly. Investors, advisors, press contacts. And right at the top, Daniel. Multiple calls, back to back. Then a message, short, no punctuation, no polish, just raw urgency. What did you do? I stared at it for a moment, not surprised, not confused, just aware. Because somewhere, in that exact moment, the version of reality he had built was collapsing. And this time, I wasn't in the background anymore. What did you do? That was the message. No greeting, no explanation, no control. Just panic. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel sounded exactly like what he had tried so hard not to be. Unprepared. So here's what actually happened. No speculation, no guessing, just facts. The legal action I filed the night before wasn't random. It was precise. An emergency injunction, backed by documented evidence that the ownership transfers Daniel executed were incomplete and, in several instances, misrepresented. Let me break that down simply. Yes, I signed restructuring documents. But those documents didn't override corporate governance rules. And those rules required something Daniel either ignored or assumed I'd never notice. Full board approval. Not implied, not rushed, not buried in paperwork. Explicit. Recorded. Undeniable. And I never gave it. That meant every major transfer of control to Victoria, legally unstable, contestable, and once challenged, frozen. At 9 a.m., the injunction went into effect. Immediately. No warning. Ownership changes? Suspended. Voting rights? Locked. Operational authority? Under review. And just like that, the version of reality Daniel had presented on stage the night before stopped existing. Within hours, everything started unraveling. Investors who had applauded that announcement, now they were calling me. Not casually, urgently. Because this wasn't just drama anymore. This was liability. The story hit the press by noon. Headlines everywhere. Startup ownership dispute erupts after public launch reveal. CEO identity challenged hours after announcement. And suddenly, the same people who clapped without hesitation had questions. Daniel lost control fast. His access to company systems was restricted pending investigation. Board members who had been conveniently uninvolved before were now very involved. Every document he touched was being reviewed, every decision re-examined. And Victoria? She tried to hold her ground. Publicly, at least. She issued a statement claiming she had acted in good faith based on the information provided to her. And maybe she believed that. Maybe she didn't. But it didn't matter. Because legally, her authority disappeared overnight. Now let's talk about the part people always wait for. The emotional side. Did I feel angry? At first, no. That surprises people. But anger requires chaos, and by that point, I didn't feel chaos. I felt clarity. I sat in my living room that afternoon, watching clips from the launch replay online. Daniel on stage, Victoria smiling, the applause. That moment where my name disappeared. And I watched it all the way through. Once. Then I closed the video. Not dramatically, not emotionally. Just finished with it. Because here's the truth. That moment only had power if it was the final version of the story. And it wasn't. 2 days later, Daniel asked to meet. In person, no audience, no stage, no performance. Just us. He looked different. Not undone, but reduced. Like someone who had miscalculated something fundamental. He tried to explain. Of course he did. Said it was strategic. Said the company needed a different face to scale. Said I would still be protected. Protected. That word lingered. I let him finish. Didn't interrupt. Didn't argue. Then I said one thing. Calm. Clear. Final. You didn't take my company. You exposed yourself. And that was it. No yelling, no escalation, because there was nothing left to debate. Now, consequences. Real ones. Legally, an internal investigation expanded into a formal inquiry. The misuse of restructuring clauses, the lack of proper approvals, the misrepresentation to investors. Daniel faced removal from all executive involvement. Financial penalties followed. And while the full legal process took time, his position in the company? Gone. Professionally, investors didn't disappear, but their alignment shifted. Fast. Because trust isn't flexible when money is involved. And once credibility cracks, it doesn't hold. The board restructured. New oversight, clear governance, no ambiguity. Socially, the narrative flipped. Quietly at first, then completely. People who once looked past me now addressed me directly. Media requests came in, but this time they asked for me by name. And Victoria? She stepped away. Whether by choice or pressure, it didn't matter. Her role dissolved as quickly as it appeared. And me? I didn't rush back into the spotlight. That's the part most people get wrong. I didn't need another dramatic moment. I didn't need revenge on a stage. A few weeks later, we held another event. Smaller, controlled, intentional. No surprise announcements, no performances, no substitutions. Just clarity. I walked onto the stage myself. No introduction needed. No one guiding the narrative. And this time, the screen behind me was simple, clean, accurate. Elena Marquez, founder and CEO. No applause explosion, no shock, just recognition. And when I spoke, I didn't mention Daniel or Victoria or the launch. I said something else, something simpler. Ownership isn't declared in a moment like this. It's built over time. And if it's real, no one can replace it. That was it. No drama, no spectacle. Because the truth didn't need it anymore. And as I stood there, looking out at a room that finally saw things clearly, there was no anger left. No need to prove anything. Just certainty. Because this time, no one needed to tell them who the real owner was.